brutality or racism or social and economic disparities, or just the sort of divisions that are defining the country at this time. We are talking to those artists as well as curators who are engaged with those issues. So today we are really excited to have with us Aaron Levi Garvey, who's an independent curator. And he's here to talk about his project with the incredible artist David Hammons, who lives in Hudson, New York. It's one of the places David Hammons lives, and where Erin has been working with him for the past few years on realizing a series of interventions using Hammond's iconic African American flag, and this was part of the Hudson Eye, which was a 10-day, 24-venue arts-focused program in Hudson, New York. Just a few words about Erin. He is an independent curator, as I said, a lecturer and a museum professional who works in the United States and internationally. He is the curator of the Jonah Boaka Arts Foundation, the curator and co-founder of Long Road Projects, and the curator and creative director of Art House HTX in Houston, Texas. You can read all about his recent exhibitions and ongoing projects on our website, forwhichisstands.art. And please follow us on at forwhichisstands on Instagram. So Erin, I'm going to hand over to you and jump right in with, the special talk around this amazing work and relationship that you've built with David Hammons up in Hudson. So
sure, thank you. Thank you for having me. I appreciate it. So as you mentioned, this was an intervention, public art installation as part of the Hudson Eye program, which is an annual arts exhibition series, lecture series, and salon series, which focuses on a multi-venue citywide platform in Hudson, New York. Hudson, New York is widely recognized as one of the jumping off points for the American arts movement, as we know it today. And Jonah Boaka, who's a friend and colleague of mine, we've been working together more or less for about going on almost 10 years. And we both have ties to upstate New York. So I was born in upstate New York. I grew up there and still maintain a family home there. And as does Jonah. Jonah has been in Hudson, New York since 2006, 2007, because it was one of the areas that you could find column-free rehearsal and dance space. So he's been doing work and interventions and rehearsals and having it as his hub. So about 3 years ago, Jonah and I started talking about the region and what it needed and what we were both doing there and how long we were spending there, and kind of came up with this idea that there should be some type of focus annually on all of the arts and the artists that live in the region. So, over the last 200, 250 years, the region has been pretty fertile for artists to have weekend homes or just go up for the summer, kind of leave their respective homes and studios in the city and just go upstate and find inspiration, go into hiding, work on a show. Kind of the same thing that Jonah was doing, is making new work and using Hudson as a think tank. So as we started planning, we were like, okay, what can we do to foster this community, build some ideas around the arts, but also have a steady dialogue? And thus happened the Hudson Eye. So it started out as 10 artists in 10 days, and it escalated to, I think the first year we had 18 artists and 14 venues. And now the second year we have 23 artists and 24 venues, and visual art exhibitions and installations that have gone well past the initial 10-day celebration and program. For instance, this one with David Hammons, Myron Polenberg and Felice Soyak at Hudson Hall, and then Felice Soyak's installation at the Olana and Thomas Cole sites on either side of the bridge. It was the first art installation that was enacting the skywalk that connects Catskill and Hudson. So that's kind of a brief on kind of everything that has led to this. So we're having these conversations, of course, we're thinking, okay, what artists are in the region, who's around, who do we feature, who are we doing studio visits with, who has long ties, who has short ties, and how do we bridge that gap? Or if there was even a gap. And what we have found kind of across the board is that everyone is really ingrained within the community. Everyone knows each other. Everyone speaks to each other on a regular basis. They see each other around town. So it's already a very community-oriented effort. To that point, Mr. Hammons has been a resident and had property in Hudson since post 9/11. He jokes and says, he left the day after. He left on 9/12 in New York City, which he's rather nomadic. So he spends a lot of time in Hudson. He spends a lot of time in Yonkers. He spends a lot of time in Harlem and in the Bronx and things. So it is a little bit here and there. So, this year was, there was a couple of other things happening globally where art was not maybe necessarily the prime focus for everyone, but we didn't want that to deter our plans in presenting this annual program. It was our second year, and to be faced with a global pandemic going into our second year, after we had received a grant support and other funding, and the first year went so well, we're like, okay, what do we need to do to make sure that this program happens? And we show that we are here for the community. We're here to stay. We want this project to continue on. And the idea with that was to have socially distanced performances and public art. And the idea behind the public art initiative was to have exterior spaces that people could more or less happen upon installations in their daily lives. So my thinking was that, okay, we're going through this dark period. People are stuck in their homes, or they have to do things solely, in a solo manner, or, physically distance, socially distance, and whatnot. So my thought was that as folks were leaving their homes and kind of going to the grocery store or roaming around town, or just getting out of their, 1,000 square foot space or 500 square foot space, whatever it is, that they would come upon installations and site activations and things like that. So that led to the idea of installing works throughout the city by a number of artists, but also attempting to work with Mr. Hammons. Jonah in 2007 worked closely with him at the Bushwick facility of the foundation to present a film work of his called Fat Free. And so there has been an ongoing dialogue, not only as artists, but as programmers together. So it was it wasn't far-fetched, but it was a natural progression of things. Like, okay, there was an activation in the city. Now, what about upstate? So the conversation started with David, hi, you're up here, we're up here. What do you think? And so it was going through a number of channels, people who are associated with Mr. Hammons, and having this discussion, asking him what he wanted to do. He's the artist that you can say that to, and you'll work to make that happen. And we started thinking, and Kamal Johnson is the first African-American mayor of Hudson. And so we thought that it would be appropriate that we install the African-American flag 1990 at the peak of town at Promenade Hill Park. And it was an ongoing discussion of, okay, when do we do this? How long does it stay up? Is it one day? Is it the rest of the year? Is it simply a street action? And the initial installation was the two flags together, one on top of each other. Well, that was a subsequent installation because in my own ignorance, I thought we could just take the American flag down and just put his up and call it a day. And then the mayor started calling me and is like, there's a lot of angry veterans and there's a lot of angry citizens and people are getting upset that you took the flag down. I was like, I mean, it's an art installation. This is public art. It's only 10 days. And they're like, no, you can't do that at all, actually. Legally, I guess, again, this is to my own ignorance. You have to have the American flag flying at all times on public property, state property, things like that, city property. And whatever you have installed with it or simultaneously has to be beneath it. So once I learned that, I actually took notice, the state flags are always underneath the American flag. POW flags are always under the American flag. So that was a nice revelation. And I'm thankful for that. So I don't get any more gaff, and my colleagues and friends and collaborators don't get any gaff for that. So when we go to install the piece the first time, David's like, okay, I have an idea. Let's hang them both together. And I was like, okay, well, yeah, they'll be together. He's like, no, let's put them both on the carabiner and just watch them waltz. Let's have them dance together. These are two icons. He's like, this is back in late July, early August. So this was kind of at the tail end of COVID, is starting to dwindle down a little bit, but also civil unrest is happening. And he wanted to use both of these flags as a metaphor for the civil unrest, but also the parallel lives and realities within this country. Oh, sorry, that's one I had a question. If someone wants to I'm just rambling about it. If we want to have it as a discussion, I'm totally fine with that too. People can chime in whenever, or Natasha, if you want to interject at any point, please let me know.
And I mean, I think it's so far it's a very engaging ramble and story about how this all comes together. So
yeah.
Please continue. And if you want to throw in any images for people who might know the flag or might just want a refresh on the flag,
maybe I'll drop those into the I'll drop some images into the chat. How's that? And then we can kind of play with it from there.
Yeah, and then I'll just continue, and people can pop things in the chat, but don't feel like you are only speaking into the void. Okay.
So as the story goes, here's the first installation. It's in the chat now, of the flag by itself, which of course, I mean, David and I were happy, but we ran into some gaff for that, and of course we weren't allowed to continue having it installed like that. So the second installation, I would also ask just that everyone, maybe I should do a screen share rather than anyone kind of saving. I'm more nervous about saving the images.
Yeah, and just so, because we don't have all the permissions to use your images, so I think everyone will be fine with the screen share. It's also maybe a little bit more immediate since there's one step.
Sure, here we go. do I do this myself or can someone else? Oh, here we go. I guess we'll do it this way. There we go. How's this? Does everyone see?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so we installed the first flag by itself and were met with, you know, some people were surprised, some people were angry, some people were happy. A number of people knew what the piece was. So this is one of 5. So it's an edition, and this is the artist's personal. And he lent it directly. He was there when we installed it. And of course, after hearing about the fact that we're not allowed to take down the American flag, we decided to go with the double. So let's see here. And we put them at...
Could you maybe enlarge the window, because we're just sort of getting the partial view, or move it? Yeah, that's great. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Cool.
That's better. Thanks.
So we decided to go with the standard, what we're allowed to do based on federal laws. You know, of course, in my thinking and David's thinking, like, do those laws really matter when it's presenting a piece of artwork? For me, not really. For David, not really. But we did have to make some concessions. So this is how. Oh no, what do I do? I'm sorry. This is how it was installed for the better part of the Hudson Eye, and remained on view for about 3 weeks total. And that was, well, about a month. It was a week prior the run of the festival and 2 weeks post. And the rationale here was that people could see it beyond the festival, because maybe some folks weren't, you know, attending any events, attending any public engagements and things like that. But then, you know, we thought, let's take it down and put it up at a later date. And that was for the subsequent street action, which had happened just earlier this month. So what I'm gonna do is I'll switch over to this window.
So how did the idea of the street action come about from, you know, showing it as a public work? Was that something that was thought about in the process of this experience?
Yeah, so that was primarily a David call. And I kind of said to him, you know, let's do whatever you want to do. I mean, I'm pretty flexible when it comes to that, and as is he. And it's, you know, it's kind of like playing jazz. It's very, I don't want to say off the cuff. It's all intentional.
Improvisational.
Improvisational, yes, exactly. So he was like, well, let's do it. When do you want to get together? And that was, you know, a few week conversation of like, hey, are you in town? No. Are you in town? Yes. Am I in town? No. So it was a back and forth. And it's not something, going back to this part of his practice, you know, the street actions are not something that are widely disseminated or talked about, or invitations are made. And, you know, it kind of falls in line with this whole idea of happening upon work. So it goes back to the original thesis of presenting public work. But this has been part of his practice since the late 60s, early 70s. In 1980, he presented a piece which is probably one of his more iconic, or most iconic other than the flag, street actions that's recognizable, called Blizzard Ball Sale, where he was by Cooper Union, and he was, you know, it was like 20 degrees outside, and he was selling snowballs to the public. There is a lore that one of those snowballs still exists and is frozen in a collector's home as well. So, but with these street actions, you know, they're planned internally, and the artist, he plans them and works with people to plan them, but they're never made public until they happen. And typically they're, you know, 15, 20 minutes, 30 minutes, an hour or something like that. They're not, they are durational, and it's, you know, here at night.
Actually looks beautiful with the wind blowing like that at night. And maybe for people who just joined us or joined us later, we're talking about David Hammons' African American flag from 1990, in which he reinterpreted the US flag in the colors of the Pan-African flag. This is a new project, a recent project in which Aaron Levi Garvey, who we are talking to today, the curator of the Hudson Eye Public Art Festival earlier this year, collaborated with Hammonds on this installation that we are looking at right now.
So while this was on view, David had the idea, again, as I was saying earlier, about the possibility of placing them together and flying them together, as you can see in this dance. So this was the first time that we did it, and we did it solely to see what they would look like together. It was not the actual street action. It was not it was just kind of, as we were installing, it's like, let's see what it looks like. I've never been able to fly them together. Typically, you know, when it was shown in Venice, it was by itself. At the Studio Museum, it's on view by itself. At the Broad, it's on view by itself. So it was like, well, let's see how these two kind of go together. How do they merge? How do they dance? How do they interact together? And, you know, as the wind blows, and as they, you know, on windier days, they are more chaotic, and on more dull days, as David said, you know, the American flag seems to be oppressing the African American flag. And he's like, that's oppression right there. And so, as it's draped over.
Especially when you think about, I mean, I was just curious also to hear what his what his take on the flag today, because this is made in the 90s, and you know, it's 2020 now, and at the time he was thinking about, you know, the climate of the 60s and the 70s and Black nationalism and Black power at that time, and how, you know, freedom and the pursuit of happiness, which are these values that the American flag represents, was a symbol of America's unfulfilled promises to African Americans, and also against the violence that, you know, the violence that has been done in the name of these values to African Americans. And if he shared some of his thoughts about, you know, that moment when he was reflecting on that in the 90s and today, and maybe that was a very visceral reaction that he had when he saw the American flag and his African American flag together.
Right.
So it's really.
Right. I mean, and the prime focus of having these two together was for everyone to kind of have that reaction and have that understanding and think deeply about what these two icons mean, and have, I mean, in my mind, this is one of the most iconic and relevant pieces to have been created in the 20th century. You know, aside from, I mean, I can't even think of a piece that is so widely disseminated and appropriated and used in so many other formats. If you think about it, I mean, I just saw Converse did a pair of shoes, you know, 2 weeks ago or something, a la David Hammons flag. So, I mean, he's really truly an oracle when it comes to thinking deeply and having thought-provoking engagements with pieces and the creation of pieces and the social study and the social commentary. When creating this piece, I mean, I see this has now become replicated in, you know, postcard format on sneakers. I see people that have these in front of their homes instead of any other flag. They have this flag flying. You know, I see this. It's now, I think, also become something that's widely recognized during protests and is a symbol of standing up and equal, is a symbol of, you know, I don't want to I think I think it's like equity. I think it's a symbol of equity. I think it's a symbol of togetherness and an understanding is that we are here and we are part of this country as well, despite what this country has done in an oppressive manner to people of color, indigenous peoples, outsiders, in the namesake of, right? And so when we did this action, here it is during the day. To kind of give you an idea of their interaction.
Is it possible to maybe enlarge and just fill the screen for a second so we can maybe just have a moment where we could
sure
have a close look?
Yeah.
Thank you.
So the So this is purely documentation. As you can see, there's someone off in the distance, kind of taking their own pictures of it. But this was solely during the first installation of like, okay, how does this look? How does it act? How does it, you know, is it a perfect day of wind? Is it not a perfect day of wind? So this singular instance was what gave David the idea to reinstall the piece in order to create new work. And so when we reinstalled this was a matter, I mean, this 1 minute video is about 30 seconds shy of the entirety of the piece being installed in this manner the first time. Earlier this month was when we installed it and we left it up for about an hour or two and took film footage, documented it because David plans to create a new film work.
And you reinstalled it the second time in the same way, the two flags together?
Yep. And so there is other video footage of it, however, that I can't preview that here. But David wanted to install it because it was, you know, it's fall, more people are kind of coming out. Again, this was in late July, early August. In October, a lot of people were out. There was, I mean, the park was packed. There was, you know, tons of people were there. It was a number of people that had absolutely no idea what was happening. And then there was a couple of people that did know what was happening and felt wildly inspired and fortunate to have been there. And that's kind of the oral histories and the oral traditions that come from a lot of David's work and the folklore that comes from David's work in these street actions is you have to have been there. And if you weren't there for it, then did it happen? Did a tree fall in the woods and make a sound if no one was there to hear it type scenario? So rarely with these street actions is there video capture or film capture other than a singular couple of stills, like with Blizzard Ball Sale, like with Fat Free.
Well, it's also, I mean, it is quite striking to see them together, because I've also only ever seen, you know, the David Hammons flag, the African American flag on its own, and it's so striking to see it parallel to and blowing in the wind with the American flag. It does become something else.
Right.
And you know, I remember reading something that David Hammons had said in a different context, that it was, and I think I jotted it down, that outrageously magical things happen when you mess around with the symbol. And you know, it's sort of that instance, not only of the fact that his African American flag messes with the symbol of the American flag, but that the two of them together in this way, in this unexpected way, as a result of, you know, as you say, just the kinds of permissions and federal laws and whatnot, but that situation actually really created the context for this other magical thing to happen. When you see them together, I think it's really very powerful, you know, because it's not on its own any longer, especially in this time where we've all been so aware of the divisions and the disunity in the country. And I think there's this powerful coming together of the two at this moment. So I would love to hear what other people think, people who are in the chat, who want to jump in and, you know, ask a question or type a question. So we invite you all to jump in.
Yeah.
And yeah, and I was also curious about how people responded and reacted, and you know, how people read the black and the red and the green, you know, as opposed to the blue, the white, and the red. So it was great to also hear some people, your reflection on some people being, you know, not quite able to read that, and other people just feeling that they got it, and you know, and that it was sort of special to participate in that moment.
Yeah, some people, there was one gentleman who was a professor at a private school in upstate also, who he was making a project himself and was taking footage throughout the Hudson Valley and just happened to stop by. And he kept saying, he's like, oh, by coincidence, I'm here. I can't believe I'm here right now. And David tells him, there are no coincidences. You were meant to be in this place right now. And I mean, he was, I'll, for as long as I'll never forget his reaction, because he was like, is that, oh my God, like I teach his piece in my contemporary art history classes. And he was like freaking out. He's like, I can't believe I'm sitting here right now. And he goes, well, Mr. Hammons, can I take a selfie with you? And he's like, no, but can I take a picture of you? So like, it's not always in like all seriousness either. Though he deals in heavy subject matter, there is levity in a lot of his work, and there is a sense of humor, and there is a softness to it, even though a lot of times his work will be taken and used in a manner of, you know, in protest and revolt, and as and using symbology behind it, which it rightly is justified. I mean, wholly justified that his work is used in that manner. I think that that's what makes him an absolute genius and an icon. And so to have seen that professor there, like fawning over him, and he's like, you have to see my students' work, and he was very engaged and interested in seeing how these younger students who were being introduced to his work were interpreting his work and their essays and things like that. So it was really interesting.
Yeah, and I mean, it has become, it's interesting how the Hammons flag itself has become so symbolic and iconic.
Right.
Of you know, the fight against racism, you know, so emblematic of you know, the affirmation, you know, of Black diaspora and as a nation, and you know, of liberation, etc. That it's it's curious to see that across, as you say, across popular culture, you know, whether it's sneaker brand or whether it's the actual artwork at an art institution, that the work is out there across culture, in classrooms, you know, in public spaces, and really has become maybe even something else at this point.
In my mind, I think this piece should be taught kind of aside from art history or contemporary art history. I mean, in my mind, were I writing history books, I'd be putting this in contemporary history or 20th century and 21st century history, because it does transcend A, an artwork, and B, societal recognition, societal ideas of what cultural interpretation is, cultural appropriation, the ideas of appropriation, reimagining of icons, because the icon in which Hammons took this and riffed on the American flag, you know, the Pan-African flag meant something vastly different than what the African-American flag meant. You know, one was to, okay, we are all in a united front to leave, and what his icon means is like, we are all in a united front to stay, because this is our land as well. Like, this is where we were brought, and this is where we are citizens, and this is where we interact and live and stay, and this was founded on our, you know, on our backs and our efforts and through our efforts. So and how now, what it means, what it was created for, and the thoughts that was created through, and now what it means, and what people are taking that and like reinterpreting it. In my mind, this is a historic piece. You know, this is a piece of history in general, not just a piece of art.
Yeah. And then it's also, you know, it's such a living memorial as well as public art. And we had a question from Emily about, you know, public art and its status as public art and as a monument or a memorial, and the relationship between the two. And I mean, when I look at it, I certainly, given the debates, especially in the South, around historical memorials and sculptures that glorify, you know, a particular past, a very white and supremacist kind of version of history, that in fact we can, you know, what Hammons offers is that we have these, you know, new objects, new memorials, like in a way advancing the culture and the objects that come from the culture to become art, memorials, public art, etc.
Well, and a living memorial. I mean,
Living,
I think this object is living.
Yeah.
You know, not only because it can be installed in this manner or create new works, but I think it's a living conversation just simply over the last 30 years since it was created. I think that's what makes a living memorial and a living monument. And I you know, I could say the same thing for the monuments and things that are being taken down across the country, because the conversation has, I don't want to say it's been continued, but it's been contextualized so that the full history has been stated rather than a partial history from Jim Crow era South, because a vast majority of these monuments in the South that are being contested and taken down and removed were put up in the early 20th century. You know, they were not put up, you know, during the rebuild of Atlanta. They were not put up during, you know, the founding of Raleigh, Durham, North Carolina. They were put up in as a way to say, you know, it's a form of white supremacy. I mean, it is what those monuments are, and they are living monuments. They just have happened to have been dormant for 80 years, and I think that they're being finally put down and put to rest. So I think other monuments like David Hammons' flag, I mean, there should be one in every city in America, in my mind. even though there's only 5. A replica should be elsewhere.
It is also about, I mean, it's about the past, it's about the present, but it's also about the future, and this kind of future imagining, and this, you know, kind of, for lack of a better term, this radical Black imagination, you know, of what the nation could be, with in future, you know, what how that could look, what that could be. We have a couple of questions, so I'm going to segue to the chat box. So Bethlehem McConnell has a question. Could you speak to the permanent half-staff installation of the flag? I don't think it was permanent, Bethlehem.
It was not. It was about, I think it was 2 or 3 weeks after John Lewis had passed away. And so that was the rationale in having a half staff. It wasn't permanent, it just happened to be, and David wanted it to be a half staff because of such. And
so
then.
So it does connect to what Bethlehem was saying, is for her, it connects to the normalization and institutionalization of everyday murder of Black people in the United States.
Right. And so that was also something that David had mentioned. He said that he was willing to lend the piece. And it was very, I mean, again, he's an oracle and a deep thinker. When we were talking about how long to leave this installed, and he said, we can leave it up through the year, we can leave it up through the month, or we can raise this flag every time a Black man is murdered in the United States. And immediately I'm just like, well, that's really heavy, and I hear exactly what you're saying. I think that we should. And he's like, but you wouldn't take it down if that was the case. It would never go down. And so, you know, he is thinking about it in that realm of like, this is a monument, it is a memorial, it stands for so much more than simply a riff on the American flag and the Pan-African flag.
It's just really incredible, the power of that flag. Well, anyone else like to jump in? I see Willie Cole on the Zoom. Hey, Willie, nice to see you here. Who's also an artist, an amazing artist from based in New Jersey. Thank you for joining us. So do you think there are plans for the film, and what would maybe happen with some of this material that you've now recorded with him, and that there might be a video work in the you know, I mean, just it sounds like David Hammons also the kind of thinker who's always kind of, you know, whose mind is always working in such a multifaceted way that who knows what, where and how this would end up. And I'm just, you know, because it sounds like he's just one of these people who can always absorbing and taking in, but pivoting all the time from, you know, showing different facets of.
Sure, I can tell you what I think would happen. I have absolutely no idea. This is complete conjecture, and my own personal thought is like, maybe he's going to create a film out of it. Maybe he will make a new object out of it. I really don't know. Again, he's the type of artist who is constantly collecting things and objects and ideas. He's like taking in information at all times. I mean, he is a true artist in that he is really always thinking deeply about so much and firing on all cylinders at all times that, you know, I mean, he could have a mass archive of video work that's existing in his studio that no one knows about yet. You know, there could be a lot of things. I could tell you, my desire is that I would love to see it become a new piece. I would love to see it become a new object or something. And I was just happy to be there and be able to be with him for a few hours here and there, and facilitating it and helping with his vision. So I'm mostly just thankful. What's going to happen to it, I can't speak.
Do you think he would be okay if we sort of just, if there were just all these bootleg copies of this flag and people, you know, I just put one out my house if I wanted to?
I mean, there's a lot of bootleg copies. I mean, I see them all the time, and the little ones that, you know,
Uh-huh. Yeah.
I see them all over. I think he finds it amusing, but also I think that, I mean, he spoke a little bit to it, and he like sees it as like a respect, but also is happy to see that, you know, because he knows there's only a finite number of the actual ones.
Mm-hmm. And
You know,
because
so
it's not about having the artwork as an object, but really about standing for something and showing one's, you know, support for that, or allegiance with that, or, you know, connection to that for which it stands.
Right. Can you talk a little bit of public reception to this work? Hudson, there's another question about the public reception. People absolutely loved seeing it. While it was on view for the 3.5, 4 weeks that it was up, I was getting texts and emails and watching it kind of show up in various social media platforms and things. People loved it. I mean, everyone in Hudson proper that I spoke to absolutely loved it. There were a number of people when we were installing it that were questioning what the hell were we doing, and why were we taking one flag down and adding another one, and why were there two, and what does it represent? And you know, we would just kind of respond with questions like, well, what do you think it represents? What does it look like to you? What's different? Kind of asking people to like dig a little bit deeper than just saying, why are there two flags? Why is that one different?
Yeah, and that kind of questioning is a great way to get into it. But, you know,
right.
I think that that there are people who ask questions about it. It's a great way of opening up and getting into what the flag means, and, you know, why it's important and why now.
Right. Especially now. I mean, I think it's as relevant as ever. I mean, he could have made this in, you know, 1920, and it will still be an icon, and it will still be as relevant and, you know, in perpetuity.
Yeah, and as we know that despite the more positive turnout of the presidential election that I think many of us are hoping for, that, you know, the work of anti-racism, the work of equality, and the work of freedom is still ongoing.
Right.
And you know, and part of what we are doing right now is that, you know, in talking about artists and their interventions into the kinds of problems that continue to plague this country and, you know, globally. In if we think about colonialism and slavery, you know, and the diaspora, it's a global phenomenon. That these works, these artworks, and these ideas and these actions will still continue to guide us. And so thank you, Erin, for making time to talk to us.
Thank you. Yeah, of course, a pleasure.
Amazing project. And
may I jump in with a question?
Jump in before we go? Mm-hmm.
Yeah, thank you both so much for this talk. And Erin, I so appreciate your sharing the images and the video clips of the Hammond's flag flying in Hudson, because for those of us not able to visit on site, it makes such a difference to see the tactility of those two flags in motion together. In so many ways, it does visually come across as oppressive because the US flag is larger and visually is dominating the Hammond's flag. But in so many ways, it there is this connotation and this potential for visual collaboration, that they are in partnership and flying in tandem together. So I find that to be a very poetic, physical, visible motion and potential collaboration. I'm thinking to just elaborate a little further on my question about the relationship between public art and memorials. I'm thinking about, in this current political moment, we are grappling with centuries of systemic racism and problematic American history. We are grappling with the restrictions of quarantine and all of the complications the pandemic has wrought on the activity of our nation. I'm wondering, do you think that public art is a way forward for us to engage these concepts politically, to engage with art in a safe, socially distanced space? Is this the kind of work we as curators should be focusing on in this current moment? And do you have further plans to bring this kind of public art into spaces in Hudson or through various avenues with your work?
Yeah, I mean, I think that that's kind of the crux of public art in general. That it should be something that causes further thought or community engagement. I mean, in my mind, at least, I feel that it should be a place where people can have a salon type scenario. And this is my own personal definition of it, is I just feel that these sites should be places where people can have a community and can sit and talk and theorize and have these discourse about a number of things. It doesn't necessarily have to be what the piece is about, but it anything. I think that it can just be the conversation starter and can be the match strike, like it's the thing that makes the spark. And then from there, that people can kind of go away with it. Take it away, not go away with it, but you know what I'm saying. Run with it. And for me, something in my work, this part of the Hudson Eye this year was using the local cable station and the public access hours to play art films and artist films. And for me, I'm always thinking about abstract ways and to present public art or art to the public and the general public, the non-art enthusiasts, as a way of like a type of inception or something. If someone sees this enough, then they'll be curious enough to do some research, or if they are around something enough where they have something that they've it's to gain curiosity and to start the conversation still again, and kind of the same rationale. So if there's ways that, I grew up watching public access and having cable access television, and there was a number of things. I mean, Bob Ross is like a crazy arts icon, right? But then it goes to like Wayne's World, which is a parody of public access and people doing wild things on public access television. So it kind of goes a little bit in a more subversive and deeper fashion of how people can access things. And not everyone, and I think that that's one thing with the arts world in general for me that I see as someone that participates in it, that there is an elite mentality, or there's a perception that the arts are only for the elite, and that quite often, more often than not, artists they're just people. They're people that are, they're special in their own right, and they think deeply and they think differently than the average people, but they are people in general, and that arts are not for the elite, and that museums are not for the elite, and public art is not for the elite. It is for everyone, and these works are being created for everyone. They're not being created to make millions of dollars. That's not what they're for. And when that happens, it is a rarity. However, that is what the general public hears about. You know, they hear about a Da Vinci that sells for $480 million, and they think, oh, well, the arts aren't for me. So then the next step is that, well, since I can't participate in that realm of millions and billions of dollars, then why do I need to go and take on arts education, or why do I need to go to a museum? When, you know, most museums are free to the public. You know, the Smithsonian is free, the Met is pay what you wish, things like that. So there's New York Historical Society is pay what you wish. So it's more about access and a hope to provide further access. So
yeah, and public art also speaks to, you know, a city or a region, and or, you know, a location that you know, it also becomes part of that kind of cultural identity, you know, and so in so doing says something about, you know, the communities who live there and the people who might pass by and see or not see, but that there's this openness to new ideas. And I perhaps maybe would conclude with this wonderful quote that I love by Thomas Hirschhorn, who's also an artist whose work over the years I, you know, love experiencing, and maybe whose practice is also a little bit in line with someone like David Hammons as well, that there's a kind of conversation too between those, between their practices. But he said of David Hammons' African American flag in particular, he said, it is not only an artwork, it is a flag for a new nation, a flag for a new insight. It is a new flag for a new form and a new truth. And David Hammons, in creating this flag, creates a new truth. And what more can art do? So I think that's just a wonderful way to conclude and to think about, you know, that the work of art and the work of artists are in many ways similar to the work of philosophy and the work of philosophers, you know, in helping us to think through the big questions and the big problems, and to put forward new truths and new realities and new, you know, imaginations. So this has been very inspiring for us at this time, and for anyone who's been on this call and wondering what the latest is on, you know, the elections while we sit here. Maybe you've got your little, you know, news stream going there, but it looks like Joe Biden will get Georgia and Nevada, and so fingers crossed. Thank you to everyone for joining us on this really excruciating and exciting time.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone.
Bye, everyone. Stay safe.
Thank you. Bye.